the band? Where does it come from? Where do we start getting it? Really, members will generally take one of three perspectives, and I'll put these. These could still receive a revelation somewhere along the line, but the problem is we don't have the
those to be neutral in the war against Lucifer, and that those that were punished with being African American on this life, and that was the main reason that they weren't allowed to have the priesthood. And I thought that was incorporated by Brigham Young, and whether I don't know if I got it right exactly who, but there were a few other leaders down the road that had reaffirmed what Brigham Young had taught.
Well, listen, we've got some things that were said, and we'll get to that. But that was never. I mean, there was never
doctrine.
Yeah, it was never a doctrine. Matter of fact, we can find more statements that wasn't true than those that said it. Right? Listen, and I'm not going to kid you. We have statements from people, leaders of the church coming through the years, where you read it, and yeah, it's as we read today, it seems extremely racist in terms of what it was saying, right? So, I mean, we've had a whole talk by Elder Uchtdorf talking about those times, where some things that, but that's one of the mistakes we can make is we tend to put what we believe now and how we view things and impose that upon those in the past, and doesn't mean they weren't good people, but they just were living in a different culture.
It was, these are big memories, but a few years ago in the Silicon Valley YSA Award, there was a speaker who talked about how there was a church leader who did say some pretty racist things. And as soon as the declaration came out that all worthy male members could have the priesthood, people were asking about it. He said, forget everything that I said about that, follow what the church teaches, right? He was pretty much openly acknowledging that he was wrong on that.
Number two, the band did not originate with Joseph Smith, but was implemented by Brigham Young by revelation. The problem is, again, we don't have the revelation, right? And the third one is band began as a series of administrative policy decisions rather than a revealed doctrine, and drew partly upon ideas regarding race common to the mid-19th century. That time gives us greater authority to this policy than it did. That tends to be the one that
plausible.
That one seems the most plausible. Yeah.
And so, and one of the things that grew out of this was that with the passage of time, even though it may not have felt like it was a revelation, but the policy, the practice had become such that over so much time, it began to feel like in order to rescind it, it had to take a revelation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of where we got to.
It almost reminds me a little bit of like the whole Lamoni thing, where he goes like, wait a second, killing my slaves is a bad idea.
Yes.
Right? It's one of these things where it's like that's how it always was. And so it takes a while to be like, hey, let's question this thing that we think might not be right. But,
yep.
And that's more on us than the church itself.
Yeah, good. So why did God withhold priesthood for people of African descent? Theories of men are, and here's just the theories of men, right? These are the ones that we hear the most. Black skin was a sign of divine disfavor with or curse. This really comes, this comes really from
Second Nephi.
Yes, well Second
Nephi
5:25, Genesis 9, 18,
the mark of Cain and all that. But then we also see in Jacob, where Jacob is specifically chastising the Nephites and saying, I fear at the last day that your brethren, the Lamanites, will have a whiter skin than you at the judgment day. And it's one of those things that we have to remember, that these people came from Jewish faith, and Hebrew has a lot of things that are not meant to be taken literally.
Black skin reflects unrighteous actions in pre-mortal life, the one that Shane was talking about.
Well, and then-
heard that one.
When they're talking about whiter skin, is that literally or is that metaphorically? Because we also talk about white robes too. I don't know if that's going to be literally or metaphorically.
Blacks or people of different ethnicity are inferior. Um,
Goes against biblical
and
teachings.
then that goes against, and we read this one here, right? So these theories of man, we just can't, we just don't. When people say that, they give theories, we just have to say, hey, that's not true. And then the big one, mixed race marriages are a sin.
That's right. For a while, it was illegal to do that, wasn't it?
Was, yeah, up till what, 1962, and changed it.
Somewhere.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, to you, whatever the point on the previous slide, the third one,
Uh-huh.
I mean, was it the Constitution or Declaration of Independence? One of them. Black people didn't have any rights to do anything, right?
Right,
So.
right. Well, that was the Supreme Court said, right? That there's not.
Was it women that had like less, or no, they didn't have rights either, so.
Not
Yeah.
until 1920.
Yeah. I mean, there was a, Supreme Court come out, and what was it, 64, 63, somewhere in there with this court, where all of a sudden, so they were just, so the original Supreme Court says, hey, there's not a law that among the blacks that the whites have to honor. Right? And then they rescinded that one. They overturned that, I think 62 or 63 right there. And then, but that's where segregation then, right? That's where they said they have rights, but it's going to be separate.
Separate but equal.
Right, it's going to be separate. Then we get into the segregation. So, but whatever the reasons for those, these are just the theories of men that we try to come up with to justify or why this was happening. We don't know.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
So just for context for us, what did Brigham Young say?
So, mixed race marriages are a sin. So
That's literally the quote.
yeah, so I'll just put, did Brigham Young say race mixing was punishable death? Did he say that? Oh, yeah, he said it.
Oh, man.
Yeah, he said it.
It sounds like.
Yeah, he totally said it. But I want to say this. He said, people will put that, I see this on the internet, people ask this question, well, Brigham Young, yeah, he said it, and he never did kill anybody, right? It was happening, he never did kill anybody. He had a problem with it, and you have to understand the context of what his problem was. His problem was this, was that he's in Salt Lake. President William Appleby is a mission president back in Boston. And when he's back in Boston, he comes across a man, Enoch Lewis, who has married a state president's back there daughter, Matilda Webster. And when Brigham Young gets wind of this, he's a little disturbed by it. There's another thing going. He comes back to winter quarters to meet up. Him and Appleby and a lot of them in Storm 12 meet in winter quarters. And they're kind of discussing this. There's another guy there by the name of William McCary, and he's an ex-slave that has joined the church, and he's starting to do a practice of something in organizing his own church. And he has some rituals of getting in there that are very. Anyways, I'm not getting to just it, but he was doing some immoral stuff in this church that he had organized. So this was happening back there in Council Bluff, winter quarters. And so all of a sudden, so when when Brigham Young hears about this, he is very concerned that the marriages are taking place. And it's just about right after this that he issues the proclamation, or gives the priesthood will no longer be given to black members of the church, right? But why does he believe this? All right. Who wants to read this one for me? Go ahead.
This idea that black and white mixed children cannot reproduce, much like mules, was also brought up later in Utah. The belief that interbreeding between the races leads to degenerate and or infertile offspring was common in the 18th and 19th century. For example, Josiah S. Knott, an American surgeon, wrote in his 1843 essay, The Mulatto, a Hybrid, probable extermination of the two races if the whites and blacks are allowed to intermarry. That the inbreeding of mulattoes was not very prolific and produced feeble offspring doomed to extinction within a few generations.
All right, so here was his thing. So he's a pretty famous doctor back in Alabama area. He's pretty influential. But he in his books he's talking about classes of animals and different things. And he is saying that a class of animal cannot breed with another class of animal because it will make them sterile. And then as his example, he uses mules. So does anyone know how you get a mule?
A horse and a donkey.
Horse and donkey, right? And then you get a mule. A mule is always what?
Sterile.
Sterile. So Brigham Young, now listen, it would only take a generation for them to know that this isn't true, right? They haven't seen it yet. They haven't had children of interrace that really grown up, at least that they know of. They just don't know that that's not true. So in Brigham Young's thinking,
You got to have more kids.
this is a plan of salvation killer, right? If we have people getting married and
Because
then
it's
their
really,
children
really
can't have
important to reproduce.
offspring. So just so you understand what Joseph or what Brigham Young is thinking, this is why he's thinking this, because this is kind of a prevalent idea that's going around.
Okay, where was this Josiah S. Not?
Where is he?
Where was he? Because it wouldn't surprise me if there are some children of slaves whose parents who were interbreeding, who were a result of interbreeding. And if they ended up having kids, it wouldn't take that long to figure out, because they took advantage of their slaves quite frequently.
They did. Yeah, I don't know.
So
I don't
like the evidence would have been there.
And again, he's talking about producing feeble offspring due to their concern is that there could be some. Now we know that that's not true. Fine.
They were bleeding people, so.
Right, right,
Okay,
right.
if this was back in the time when they were bleeding people, I guess that's a little more understandable, but
But at least you get an idea of where Brigham Young's coming from when he makes that statement, because he
Okay.
really sees this as this counters the plan of God.
really hard not
So
to
he
think
has a
straight,
concern
so
about
it's not-
it, right? So the start and the finish of the priesthood ban. And it's just some things. 1849, the first known direct statement by a church president that blacks were denied the priesthood comes from Brigham Young, February 1849. This is shortly after after he comes back from Winterport. This was the second time back there, when he said of the Africans, the curse remains on them because Cain cut off the life of Abel. The Lord had cursed Cain's seed with blackness and prohibited them from the priesthood. So there is Brigham Young's thoughts on it, right? Was he wrong?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, well, and
Yeah.
so when was you had the other quote from him where he was saying, yeah, the black. It's
Yes,
like,
priesthood holders
there's a
in Africa.
dichotomy there.
Yeah.
right?
Well, there's some things that he's seeing some things that he thinks he's seeing something that's damaging, and he's trying to figure out how to address it, right? 1849. So this is what, 100 years later,
Almost.
right? During George Albert Smith's administration, priesthood leaders in the Philippines were authorized by the first presidency to ordain black men to the priesthood. It's 1849, right? These were
1948.
native men with black skin who had no African ancestry. Here, descendants from black Africa only, not skin color, became the disqualifying factor. So that's a big one. Now it's just not blacks, but it's
Just not
Africa. Then now it goes back to Africa, right?
Huh.
1954, President McKay appoints a special committee of the 12 to study the issue. They conclude that the priesthood ban had no clear basis in scripture, but that church members were not prepared for the change. That was their submission.
Which 1954, okay.
1954, that's President McKay,
Yeah,
right?
before civil rights movement ever really
Yeah.
caught steam.
Yeah. President McKay authorizes church leaders to ordain Ephesians, men of the priesthood, based on his understanding that despite blackness, they were not related to the Africans, right? So somewhere in their thinking, it comes back to Africa. Kind of one of the cool things that starts to happen, and this is under Kimball, and it really becomes this probably becomes one of the big things that gets Kimball thinking about it. Now, some of the other presidents were really thinking about it. McKay thought about it. Matter of fact, McKay was probably that close to overturning it, but there was a member of the Court that would not go. And so
But
we don't. do
President
that.
McKay was also before, we gave rights to, before segregation ended.
Yeah.
So he had
Yeah.
the country against him.
Yeah.
Pretty progressive.
Who wants to read this one? This is kind of an interesting one
I
here.
can read it.
Go ahead, thank you.
Brazil in particular presented challenges. Unlike the United States and South Africa, where legal and de facto racism led to a deeply segregated societies, Brazil prided itself on its open, integrated, and mixed racial heritage. In 1975, the church announced that a temple would be built in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Ghanaians in the 1960s and early 1970s moved church leaders.
So this is just 3 years before. Yeah.
My grandpa served his mission in the
Tons acknowledging I know everything, but I do know enough to continue on the path of discipleship. I think that ties into this experience thing that President Campbell, who wants to be my reader on this one? You read one. Oh, is that Ann?
day after day I went alone with great solemnity
Solemnity.
Solemnity.
and seriousness in the upper rooms of the temple. And there I offered my soul and offered my efforts to go forward with the program. I wanted to do what he wanted. I talked about it to him. He said, Lord, I want only what is right. We are not making any plans to be spectacularly. We want only the thing that thou dost want, and we want it when you want it, not until.
Anything kind of stand out to you? That I love that statement.
Offered my soul and offered my efforts to go forward with the program.
Don't you like day after day?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Day after day. We're just studying Joseph Smith asking about the Lord to let Martin Harris take the things. And he
Mhm.
said, no, 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 you wonder what brought a prophet going day after day.
Yeah. This is on his mind.
Some answers don't come until after a lot of wrestling with it.
Yeah.
You get to appreciate the answer a whole lot more when you work for it.
And also sometimes like your answers don't come until like after a certain amount of time. So your life has to take like a certain course.
I love it. Love it. Anyone ever read anything by Jen Ships? She's pretty fun. She's really good. She's a Methodist, right? I'm a Methodist from Haytown, Alabama, became a acclaimed Mormon studies scholar. She's a Mormon. She studies Mormon, Mormon culture, our church.
She's still Methodist?
Yeah, she's still. Yeah. Turns out just studying the church academically and doesn't really.
Yeah.
Although for some people it does, right? But she makes just a cool observation in this. Who wants to read this one? Go ahead. You're Diana.
Jan Ships, a Methodist scholar and celebrated scholar of Mormon history, said, "A revelation in Mormondom rarely comes as a bolt from the blue. The process involves asking questions and getting answers."
Stop. Can I stop you right there? 95% of members of the church don't understand that. And she understands it. Is that we just tend to think that President Nelson is sitting in his office and God comes down and says, build more temples. And that's not how it happens. Okay? It's a process. It involves asking questions and getting it. It's a process. Keep going.
The occasion of questioning has to be considered, and it must be recalled that while questions about priesthood and the black man may have been asked, an answer was not forthcoming in the 60s when the church was under pressure about the matter from without, nor in the early 70s when liberal Latter-day Saints agitated the issue from within. The inspiration which led President Kimball and his counselors to spend many hours in the upper room of the temple, pleading long and earnestly for divine guidance, did not stem from a messy situation with blacks picketing the church's annual conference in Salt Lake City, but was the expansion of the work of the Lord over the earth.
That's just a great insight from a Methodist about what stands out to you in there.
I like how even the church leaders have to work long and hard to get an answer, how things just don't come instantly to them, even though you would consider them to be probably amongst the closest to Heavenly Father with all the work that they do. And it's practically their full-time job to be messengers of Jesus Christ. So you would think that they would be very close to the Holy Ghost. But even with all of that, they still need time to wrestle with it and to really sincerely ask multiple times.
I love it.
It's comforting.
Going back to the previous quote, it's also we want what you want and when you want.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I think the interesting part is the expansion of the work of the Lord over the earth. It couldn't go forward.
Right.
There were countries you couldn't go into because you couldn't
Yep.
have wards and states. There just wasn't anybody to be a leader. You couldn't give the priesthood to a certain race. And we've been told to take the gospel to the world. And if we can't expand, we're in trouble.
Yeah, if it was just due to pressure from outside, that would have happened 20 years earlier.
Mm-hmm.
It would have just happened then. But it wasn't until then the focus and the questions and everything started to focus on how does the work of God progress. Then when that become the question, then the answer came. And I love the fact that it came after all of they wrote it through all the turmoil,
Mm-hmm.
right? Then we can look back at it and go, yeah, there's the reason. I don't know there's a lot of things. I mean, you can read stuff on the internet, statements by brothers and stuff like that. Listen, they were given their reasons. God never did give. And you can take those and I think that the key thing for us is that we really want to look at, what do they have now? Who wants to read this one for me? Oh, got it, James?
Sure, yeah.
No, I think you said me.
Oh, I did say me in my head. On every continent and across the isles of the sea, the faithful are being gathered into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Differences in cultural background, languages, gender, and facial features fade into insignificance as members lose themselves in service to their beloved Savior. Paul's declaration is being fulfilled. As many of you as have been baptized into Christ have put on Christ. There is neither Jew nor Greek, there's neither bond nor free, there's neither male nor female, for you are all one in Jesus Christ. Galatians 3:27-28. Only the comprehensions of the true fatherhood of God can bring full appreciation of the true brotherhood of man. The understanding inspires desire to build bridges of cooperation instead of walls of segregation.
I love that. You think about temples that are built. Who do you think has more temple? Continent of Africa or Europe?
Europe.
I'd say Africa at this moment. There's so many strong members down there. And Africa is a huge continent.
Europe's
Europe's big, but Africa is huge.
Well,
It's
it's not
definitely
so
Africa.
What?
It's what?
I said it's definitely Africa.
She looked it up.
Africa has 28.
I did not look it up. I just know temple stuff really, really well.
Africa has 28. Europe has 25.
Haha, she called it.
Well, it's not a definitely. I mean, it's a close, right? But you think about the church in Europe versus the church in Africa, time-wise.
Okay, yeah. Because the church has been in Europe for much longer.
Yeah, well, there's just so much growth. If you look at West Africa, I mean, where they're built and half those states are just in West Africa.
Mm.
There's just so much coming, pathways right now. We can't get enough teachers and pathways to teach Africa. They just have so many kids that are wanting to take baptism.
And they're phenomenal.
They're phenomenal students. They're
They
just
are phenomenal.
fun to teach, and you're getting non-members in there and that are just taking it. And it's funny, they're just bringing them. It's just growing and growing. They're just announcing temples over there like crazy. It's just gonna keep going. I just put that map up there if you guys.
Wow.
What's that?
There's one in Madagascar.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I couldn't remember what the little island is out there on what the other red dot on there.
And those all built for just an hour.
The yellow ones are announced, the blue ones are under construction. There's
Purple.
another one under renovation, which is kind of hard to distinguish from here. And then there's the red ones, which are in operation, which looks like there's about 5 or 6. 6.
So yeah, you look at the announced.
They're kind of lacking in Egypt.
Well, yeah, but that makes sense too, doesn't it?
Hard to get there.
I mean, well, when we start seeing temples up on the other side, yeah, then there's some crazy stuff going.
We're gonna be going nuts.
Hard to get approval.
Well, but that's extreme Muslim areas, right? I mean, you start getting temples there, yeah, there's you better be the senior bishop if you're not before. That's gonna be some crazy stuff. So just in closing, how might you respond to your asked why the church did not ordain men as African descent to the priesthood for a time? I'd answer that.
There's no official
We
answer.
don't know. Here, but what do we know? We can say that.
That they thought long and hard and they prayed long and hard and it was from the Lord, not anyone else.
We say that I mean, they have everybody has every right to be priesthood today.
Do people ask you? I mean, is anybody asking nowadays that? I know in my era they did, but I'm wondering if it's a big deal now.
It's not as big a deal. It's been brought up here and there, but not very frequently. I think I could probably count on one hand how many times people have brought it up with me.
Members who haven't learned a lot about that yet.
Yeah, I think that's a compliment. And I think you just got people that just want to they read things. Listen, I get it. You come across some stuff on the internet, you go, is that true or not?
Mhm.
There's some stuff I found that can't possibly be true. That someone said something like that. It wasn't mean or anything. It was just it seemed like something that they just had some different beliefs about that back in the day.
Wow.
Thank you. Don't be lost, I think.
What was
Thank
it
you.
called?
What was it called again, my hair? What? Oh, thank you. Thank you. Good.
Good reading.
All right, questions, comments, things, questions that you,
We're actually ending class before 8 o'clock.
no?
That's gotta be a first.
When you hear these things that people say, man, make sure I think we're obliged to just to say something when we hear some of these things and say, hey, that's not true. Yeah.
I would say when questions like these come about, I think the most important thing is to keep your composure.
Yeah.
Stay in a loving state, because they're bringing it up out of malicious intent. You know?
Right.
They're trying to. I mean, some of them could be trying to understand, but I think that I mean, not all of us know. But we can find out together,
right.
And we try to do it in a nice way where you can pull them out of the defensiveness and try to get them into curiosity.
Yeah, and I think that's great. And that's very true as we're talking about people outside the church. I worry about the ones when we're in church and they say some of these dumb things.
Yes.
That those are the ones we really need this. We should raise our hand and say, listen,
Yeah.
that's not accurate, right? Yeah, when we're talking about people that come to us generally, that yeah, we shouldn't be defensive. It's our history, right? So we need to talk about it in a way that's disarming.
It's kind of like crazy to hear how like not woke people were back in the day. So like, they didn't really know a lot of things. So that like helped, that explains a lot to me about why like certain policies were the way they were.
Yeah.
It was just like totally different.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So, and here's one thing here, and here's one way the church was really different from every other church. And I get a little perturbed sometimes when people point out that they bring up this point of the priesthood. But as far as the church, we never had a segregation of races in the church from day one, right? Even to today, we don't have segregations of churches. Now we might have Spanish branches and things like that for convenience, right? But no one's forced to go there. I mean, that's an option, right? We've always had places. I mean, it's always been geographical, and it's never been based on social economic status or race or anything like that. Yeah.
I had actually come across somebody who would, question about oh, why didn't blacks receive the priesthood? And I pointed them to hey, it doesn't actually say black people can't receive the priesthood here, right? We don't know why. And I explained a bunch of things, and I even grabbed a bunch of stuff that was just online that talked about exactly what you said, that ever since the very beginning, we weren't really respecters of person. We would preach to anyone who would, and we actually caught a lot of flack for that. We would preach to the black people, we'd preach to the Native Americans, and people didn't like that.
Yeah, we didn't say go to your own church. I love this. This is a 2023. It's like of 1,000 slides I got here on the subject, and we're going through 12 of them. But despite the increased racial and ethnic diversity in the country, the vast majority of churchgoers report that their congregations are mostly monoracial. At least 75% of white Christians say their churches are mostly white, including 80% of white mainline non-evangelical Protestants, 77% of white Catholics, and 75% of white evangelical Protestants. Among these groups, about 2 in 10 say their churches are multiracial, and 5% or less say their churches have mostly Hispanic, Blacks, with Asian and Pacific Islander members.
Well, that doesn't work in our wards.
No. That is, listen, and I haven't even put up the slides about the Baptists and how, I mean, Black Baptists have basically become a sub religion because that's where they got shipped off to. Man, when a Baptist says something to me about, white Baptist says something to me about blacks in the priesthood, whoa. Man, because they've done a lot worse from day one. They were like, you cannot come to our church, here's your churches.
But don't you think this, official declaration proves that we have a living church? We have a continuing revelation, that we have a Lord that's answering as we go, that, you know, I mean, you go to the temple and every week it seems like it's tweaked. You know, and you go, okay, so we're still living through
Yep.
modern revelation. It's still happening, you know?
Yeah, I love the fact that it's, I mean, from the get-go, it was, and for whatever reason, we've got that part of our history, but we've never excluded people from joining us, and they were never segregated on there. And people still come in. I mean, you look at the growth, you know, even among the Black members that were coming into the church during that time. It was growing like crazy during that time, and they were creating branches over there and translating the Book of Mormon on their own, trying to so they get it to people. And it was we don't know but when people get to, when they're converted, they feel that, right? They come to it, and that was the beauty of it. Anything else?
Yeah, just another question with that, because I heard that Elder Bednar said that something to the effect that he wishes like the members of the church in the U.S. culturally were more like members in Africa. And then I also heard that like the church actually doesn't call missionaries to Africa because the members there just they're already missionaries, right? They just do it. I'm just curious if that's any.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't know about the mission calls. I do know this. I mean, when I taught African classes for like 5 years, pathways. And so all the return missionaries, but there were a few exceptions where they went somewhere outside of Africa, but most of them served right within Africa.
Well, so I know a missionary who's serving in South Africa, so I know there are at least.
Yeah, South Africa might be a little different.
Yeah,
South
yeah.
Africa.
I do know. Yeah.
Didn't the Waltons go to somewhere in Africa after Portugal? It did.
Well, actually, so Scott Stratford went there, and I know but that was South Africa. So yeah, I'm distinguishing between South Africa and the rest of it.
There are other ones where, yeah, like my cousin, I don't know which country it was, but he went somewhere in Africa. They have missions throughout Africa.
Oh, okay. Then I'm wrong.
Yeah, you asked the question.
Not every country, but there are
Good question.
some missions.
Good. Nothing else, guys. Thanks for being here. So many other things to talk about. I mean, we have limited time, and hopefully we get to the gist of it. That someone asks questions. I think the key thing is just don't make stuff up why we think, you know, just hold to what we do know. What the blessings that God gives to everybody today is the key thing. Closing prayer by Allie?
Alex. Yeah,
Alex.
whatever.
I could have sworn it's like Allie on something I have.
It is.
A-L-I.
Yeah, on Facebook. Yeah, sorry.
I get it
It's
sometimes.
confusing. Yeah, just
Want to
like,
give us closing prayer?
yeah. Dear Heavenly Father, we're grateful for this lesson, and we're so grateful that we were able to learn about things that we have had questions about, and that we can use when we're talking to other people. And please bless us that we will be safe when we drive home, and these things in Jesus Christ's name.
Amen. Thank you. Yeah, is it still raining out there when you guys got here?
Yep. Yeah, a little bit.
Thanks online. Thanks for being here. Hershey, Shane, Abby.
Thanks, guys.